All right. Well, welcome everyone who is here. It's actually a Sunday evening in July, and a bunch of women got together to talk about perimenopause and menopause on a Sunday evening in July, which just shows you how important this conversation is. So I'm going to I put together a little bit of a presentation. So I'm going to cue that up and share my screen, and we will jump in. And we were just chatting a little bit before we started the recording and sharing a little bit, those of us that are here live. And we were agreeing that this is a really, really important conversation that doesn't tend to get held. So, what I'm calling it tonight is the truth about peri and menopause and how to find balance again. And I feel really good about being able to tell you that I can back up this claim. And I have a lot to share. And I was, a little inspired, Liz. You're looking for information. I pretty confident that tonight's going to be really helpful. So we're going to dive in. Just for those of you who haven't met me before, I think most of you have. This is me, Susan Joyce Proctor, and I have been a practitioner of Ayurvedic medicine and women's wellness since 1992. And I also, with Jenny, have been co-hosting a podcast. And with Jenny and Christina, we have an amazingly beautiful women's community called Davida Rising that we have a lot to share. And we talk about these kinds of things all the time. So I pulled together information based on Ayurvedic medicine and blood type science and neurolinguistic programming and hypnotherapy. And what I'll be sharing with you tonight, which is kind of most relevant to this conversation, something called management of menopause type that I was certified in by my hero and mentor, Dr. Joseph Collins, who I will be referring to a number of times because I learned some of this amazingly valuable information from him, really, and nobody else. And I promised him, this is a little emotional for me, that I would take his work out into the world. And unfortunately, he passed 5 years ago. And it is still my intention to take his work out into the world. So, important disclaimer. I think it's always important to make this one legally and ethically that I am not presuming to provide any medical advice here. This is all about education and self-care. I think ultimately most of our care would ideally be self-care. And just to be a little snarky, I have to say this because I'm not a doctor, but very few doctors understand what I'm going to be sharing with you tonight. So um, I offer this as a fellow seeker who has found solutions and put them together and has been living them for a long time. And I'm going to make a little bit more of a disclaimer here because this is a topic that I feel passionate about. And Christina and Jenny know I feel very strongly about a lot of things. So there's some things that I sometimes rant about. So I want to just offer a context here that I'm going to be sharing tonight three different kinds of stuff. The first kind of stuff I call information. It's stuff you can Google. It's data. It's research that you might not have come across that I'm happy to let you know exists and point you toward if you're somebody that likes to do your own research, and I really encourage that. So some of that is like just objective facts that you may not have come across before. I also have some perspectives to share. There's a perspective that Ayurvedic medicine provides that's different, from pharmaceutical medicine. And I can share that kind of stuff. So that's not the same as data that you can find, but it's not my material. And then I have my own opinions about things that I want to feel comfortable sharing with you, but I'll let you know when it's just my opinion. And I'm not presuming that it's, data out there or a perspective that you can study. Like I said, I have some strong feelings about these things that I want to feel free to share with you for your consideration. But I don't want to confuse my opinion with some scientific information out there. So I think that's a really important thing to offer here. All right. I was doing a little research. I always like to do that to, just kind of see what's out there. What if, like, if you were Googling menopause and perimenopause, like what the conventional wisdom is. And I found this chart and uh, it has a little bit of value, I would say, in identifying the timeline. So it often is these days, and it's much earlier than it was in prior generations, that women start to notice changes in their cycle and in their symptoms. And these days, it can be as early as mid-30s because we live in such a stressed out, toxic world. We'll talk about why that's so important. And then, according to this, perimenopause sets in officially like mid 40s and includes a range of symptoms, including hot flashes, mood changes, and trouble sleeping. And then menopause, they're saying, is from 50 to 55, where the periods stop, although the symptoms that can continue. And then postmenopause, which I'm at and Christina's at, is menopause is over. We had that last period, and we know that because we didn't get another one, but some symptoms may continue. And they are attributing all of this to drops in estrogen. And like I said, I think there's a little bit of value to this graphic in laying out the time periods, but the rest of it, and this is my opinion, the rest of it is crap. And the reason that I say that is menopause is about way more than just estrogen. There are lots of other hormones involved that are impacting our experience. So just to be talking about that one is so one-dimensional. It's misleading and dangerous, actually, from the perspective that I'm going to share with you. And the other reason that I say it's crap is what it says here. No matter when someone starts or finishes the transition, the general stages are the same. So what they're telling us is that these are the symptoms that we can all expect. This is what, goes along with reaching these ages. And I know from my own experience that that's not true at all. And those of you who know me know that I don't resonate particularly with pharmaceutical medicine, but there are many situations where, the modern medical approach has value and makes sense. I think with hormones and especially women's hormones, that paradigm fails us pretty much completely. Again, that's a personal rant. That's my opinion. Others might disagree. But that's why I wanted to carve that out. So this is one perspective that you will see if you're doing a little research about what this period of life is about. Here's another one that I've used for a long time, and this one's a little prettier, and I kind of liked it a little bit better. But again, it's showing you which symptoms to be expecting at different ages. It's just amazing to me. That's the only thing that we're being told is what symptoms to expect. And they're not even describing to you which hormone imbalances correspond to those symptoms. They're all different. They're not all about estrogen. I'm just looking at this one here. Hair thinning. That's uh, that's testosterone that's not being buffered by enough progesterone. Fibroids are excess testosterone. Breast soreness is excess estrogen or deficient progesterone. Weight gain has to do with cortisol. Loss of libido is deficient testosterone. Th this is also kind of crap. What I can tell you about the hot flashes is hot flashes are about insufficient estrogen. And it's not surprising that sometimes those symptoms persist for reasons that we'll talk about. But again, they're telling us we can look forward to vaginal discomfort, osteoporosis, incontinence, heart disease, all these other wonderful things. This is what we're being told about menopause. I came across a completely different truth. So I'll call this a perspective in my little chart. When I had the excellent good fortune to meet Dr. Collins, who I've mentioned, I'll share a bit more about that story. But what I learned from him is that there is something called, that he called ideal menopause. And this slide here, um, this is one of the most important of the ones that I have to share with you tonight. I'm calling this one the truth, in my title, my claim that this is the truth about Peri and menopause. And I call it Mother Nature's backup plan. This is what I learned from Dr. Collins, that as compared to those two charts that we just looked at, that I'm calling crap, because they're telling us basically that we're going to lose our estrogen and be miserable for the rest of our lives in a very, one-dimensional way. That's actually not how our bodies were designed. We've been told kind of, well, we really weren't told anything. We were chatting about that before we started the recording. We really weren't told anything, but we've had the experience of symptoms. And that first chart that I showed you attributed all of them to insufficient estrogen. And I'm telling you that I know that that's not the case because I've studied this for many years. There's lots of other hormones going on. But we've basically been presented with menopause as an estrogen deficiency condition. That's the general way, most women think about it. I get older, I stop producing estrogen and I have all these symptoms. And I either suffer or I take some kind of replacement, which I've also been told could be dangerous and cause cancer. And I don't even know the right questions to ask most of the time because we've been so ill-informed. But this is what I learned from Dr. Collins, and it makes way more sense in, the model that I know about the body and how miraculous and amazing and self-generating it is. This is what, again, I'm calling the truth of how we were really designed, and I'll move this over so you can read it more clearly, is that what really happens during perimenopause, that period of, years leading up to the last period, is that the ovaries gradually reduce their production of the three sex hormones, not just estrogen, but estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, because when we're coming to the end of our reproductive life, we don't need the same levels of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone that we did when we were maintaining a menstrual cycle. You know, I mean, I remember learning about that in that movie in sixth grade, that 2 weeks of your cycle, there's more estrogen, and, that's when we're building up tissue in the uterus for, a potential pregnancy. And when that doesn't happen, progesterone is the, other hormone that, releases things, and we go back to, a baseline. So estrogen and progesterone have been in a dance, since we started, menstruating, and they're still going on. And at some point, again, we're completing our reproductive life and going into another stage of life, and we don't need that level of hormone anymore. And so the ovaries have been designed to ramp down. But the thing that we weren't told, and I know almost nobody who knows this, is that the adrenal glands were designed to pick up the slack. We were not designed to have the ovaries stop producing sex hormones and that we wouldn't have any anymore. That job was intended to be taken over by the adrenal glands in a process that Dr. Collins calls adrenal recruitment, that I call Mother Nature's backup plan. And the goal was that women would remain healthy and comfortable, that this transition does not need to be this nightmare that most of us go through. Now, I remember a number of years ago, like 30, 35 years ago, when, I was much younger and menopause was still in my future, but I was interested in all of this because, I was working as an Ayurvedic practitioner and asking a lot of questions. I met a couple of women who were much older than me and had gone through menopause, who the only way they knew they were through menopause was they stopped having periods, but they had no other symptoms and nothing else changed. And interestingly, there were two of them. They were both yoga teachers. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder why they aren't having the difficulties that everybody else seems to think of as normal. And on that note, I just want to share a little bit about the concept of normal that, again, I learned from Dr. Collins. Um, Often people go for tests of various types, and the test results come back as normal, but the person is still feeling crummy. And what Dr. Collins explains, and this makes sense if you think about it, is what normal means is of the norm, on a bell curve, like you're, kind of in the middle of the results of all the other people that took that test. We live in a world that is really, really out of balance. So to be in the normal range means that you're with everybody else who's out of balance, like right in the middle there. And he offered a goal of not, having our results be normal, but of having them be optimal. Because what normal means in our world is not what most of us would consider ideal at all. So just need to mention that. So this slide here is one of the really, really, really important messages that I have for all of you, is that we haven't been told the truth. So this is my opinion and a perspective that menopause is not a condition of insufficient estrogen. It is a transition. It was intended to be a transition where our hormone production would be taken over by the adrenal glands at a much lower level because we don't need the same levels of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone when we're not menstruating anymore. But we still need those hormones for general health in many areas that you may not know about, as well as, to avoid the symptoms that, some of you are sharing that you're still experiencing. So I know this is the truth, and I'm just going to brag a little bit because I went through this and this was my experience. I took all the steps of balance that I share with other women, and I got my hormones balanced before menopause. So I had been somebody that was normal, that had, cramps every month and bloating, and my period was never regular. And when I implemented the lifestyle and nutritional changes that I offered to other women based on my constitution and my blood type, all of that resolved. I never had another cramp, another day of bloat. And when I went through actual menopause, I had a few hot flashes. I was like you, Liz, I was always cold in my life. So it was so strange to suddenly be warm. And it was springtime, and I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to survive the summer. And I did the process that I do and identified that there were some essential oils that could help me. And I bought one bottle and used it up, and I never had another hot flash. So I went through this ideal menopause thing that I'm talking about. I have tried all of the things that I'm talking about tonight on myself, as well as many other women that I've had the opportunity to share this with over the past few decades. And I have, confirmed that this is the truth of my body. So I'm actually going to stop here to see if anybody wants to ask or say anything, because this is kind of important and controversial and like life-changing and mind-blowing and all that. So, anybody want to say anything or ask anything?
I do. It's Elizabeth. Is there a way to kind of, I guess, support or strengthen the adrenals?
Of course.
Okay. Okay.
In fact, I'm gonna share a perspective. I mentioned Jenny and I have been working together for quite a while. We've developed some really amazing stuff. And one of the things we've developed is a program called Biohacking with Ayurveda. And one of the things that we've been sharing about that is that, you know, in our world, when we were born, we were given a body without an owner's manual. And it was almost like you buy a car from a dealership and they say to you, doesn't matter how you take care of the car, doesn't matter what fuel you put in, just, run it into the ground and when something breaks, come back and we'll, do an expensive repair. Like we've been told nothing about this, about what to do. I have been learning a lot about what to do, and obviously I'm going to share some of those tips with you tonight. But in this paradigm that has been developing in our world and that Jenny's been very involved with about biohacking, we're actually learning about the body and how it works and how to support it and the things that we can do to, you know, make that easy. So the answer to your question is yes, absolutely. And that's why I feel so passionate and frustrated about all of this because these things are really quite easy when you learn them. Christina, you unmuted. Did you want to say something before I moved on?
I saw that Liz put a little message on the chat.
Ah,
Breast cancer chances increase, loss of estrogen. Can you elaborate, Liz, what you meant by that?
Basically, so like, we don't there is breast cancer in my family. Um and I feel like, what have I done, that is so different from me. On my mom's side, I'm the eldest. And the next two have had breast cancer. And so it's something that, obviously I don't worry. I know lifestyle contributes so much to that. But seeing this on the chart there that you showed, I'm just kind of curious. And then the immediate thought is, okay, is it, the decrease or maybe the sharp decrease of estrogen that then, aggravates that? So that was my question.
that's a good question, and it's a kind of complex answer because actually it would be more typically and commonly estrus, excess estrogen that would contribute to a malignancy, not a deficiency. I think the reason that that was on that chart, and that chart was a very ill-informed one. I was really just showing it to you more for like, that's what's out there, not that I agree with this. But the older we become, the more we have had an opportunity to accumulate imbalances in our lives that could contribute to malignant situations. And I think that's why that's there. The breast cancer conversation is a pretty complicated one. We do a PSA every October about this. I have a great deal to say about it. Um, and it, I would be happy to speak with you about it more personally, Liz, in your situation, because it sounds like that's something for you to be aware of. So is that an okay response for the moment?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. And thank you for asking. But again, the fact that that's on that chart, that would um, kind of cause you to ask that question. There's been so much negative expectation built into so many things about women's health. I find that disturbing on its own. But
Right.
no, estrogen deficiencies do not, uh, are not what we would typically think of as a factor in malignancy. It would be really more excesses. But I'll just, oh, I can't help it.
Thank
One of the
you.
things that's so important are the ratios between and among the hormones. So if a woman has a progesterone deficiency, that is going to make her estrogen excessive relative to the progesterone. And actually, many of these symptoms, I would say, are more alleviated by progesterone than estrogen. I think, as I said, the estrogen part of the conversation, I think, has been overemphasized relative to the other hormones. So let's dive into some of those because I have more to share. Okay?
I have a question.
Sure.
Because I had fibroids and it was,
Hmm.
if I recall correctly, it was increased estrogen. If I'm recalling correctly,
And
because I kept doing things like I was trying to be super healthy at that time when I were discovered, and I was eating like edamame instead of chips, and that's all soy, all of this stuff that was increasing my estrogen levels, and my fibroids were humongous, like probably very abnormal, like watermelon size. They were huge. I looked pregnant, so I had them removed, but it was due to increased estrogen. So I think that what you're saying is right because it's excess estrogen, is what it sounds like.
estrogen, in an ideal sense, contributes to growth in the body
Yeah.
in a way that's valuable and important. In
Hmm.
fact, when when we don't have as much of it after menopause, that's why we often experience muscle loss and bone loss, and we need to do exercise and strength training to tell the cells to grow because we don't have the estrogen doing that message anymore. So estrogen is responsible for increasing. But in the case of fibroids, I have reason to believe that there's also testosterone involved. And this is where I'm going to just express, I get a little frustrated. And I
Hmm.
say sometimes that in my next lifetime, I'm going to go to naturopathic medical school
Hmm.
because I understand the things I'm sharing with you really well.
Yeah.
I don't have the clinical training as a physician to be able to treat people in more specific ways and deal with your question in a more specific way. And I've been really frustrated since Dr. Collins passed that I haven't had him to confer with.
Hmm.
One of the things I mentioned that recently there's been so much energy and attention around this topic. Christina knows this, and Jenny certainly does, that Jenny recently met and introduced us to an amazing woman doctor who has, I believe, taken this. Well, she hasn't taken my model, but
Hmm.
she's doing the very, very, very specific testing
Hmm.
that can illuminate all of these things in a way that I have not seen before. And Jenny and I are actually very excited. We're going to be partnering with her. And the three of us had a conversation the other day about this being a global paradigm that we are planning to introduce for
Yeah, that's great because there
like
wasn't a lot of information when it came to fibroids. They didn't know the cause. Like, this is 2018, and I'm not even that far back. So I made some choices based on the information I was given, and now 6 years later, it's like total different information. So unfortunate for me.
well, I'm in the meantime, I'm gonna just offer a couple things. I have some books here that I'm going to show you when we get to that.
Okay, thank you.
Of the doctors that I have come across that understand any of this, um, for anyone who wants to be doing their own research.
Yeah.
Dr. Collins is my major one. He was a naturopathic physician, and actually he was a nurse before he became a doctor. And he told me that the secret of his success was that he was trained to think like a woman and very
Oh.
holistically.
That's awesome.
So that was again, I'll continue on with the story. So hormones, um, with women, to me, the word hormones is always accompanied by an eye roll. Oh yeah, like hormones. Like we all know, that's like the bane of many women's existence. And it's in that mysterious realm out there that we don't understand, but just typically causes problems. So when we're talking about the whole menopausal situation, perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, we're focusing mostly on the sex hormones that I've mentioned a few times of estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. Testosterone is a male hormone, but we have it and we produce it and we need it. And the deficiencies and excesses around that also can have a number of repercussions in our lives. But the whole endocrine system, it's like the knee bone is connected to the thigh bone thing. It's very subtle. and very dynamic. So the situations going on with other hormones often are directly affecting the way our body produces the sex hormones. And I have the word cortisol in bold here because we're going to spend a few minutes speaking about that. And it is by far the most important, disruptive, critical hormone when it comes to this whole conversation that we're having tonight. And I'm going to show you why, both on all three levels. I'm going to show you the information, the perspective, and my opinion about it, because this one completely lines up. And I'm also going to refer to insulin, which also might surprise you, contributes to all of this. And we're going to refer also to oxytocin, which is an antidote to cortisol, which is really important because it's an antidote to cortisol. So it's a playing field that's much wider than just estrogen. But yes, so what I want to be showing you here, I was presenting, in one of the earlier slides, Dr. Collins' description of ideal menopause, which those yoga teachers that I met years ago had, and I had one that was quite close. And so the question arises, well, if we were designed for that, how come hardly anybody is having that experience? What would interfere with our ability to have an ideal menopause and have this transition be comfortable and healthy and all of that? And there's a few major contributors here. The major one is stress. And I want to say that when I'm talking about stress, it's not just a concept. We've got this image here of like, we all know what stress is. And we think of it, kind of as a concept of, being upset and overtaxed and all of that. But it's a chemical experience in the body. And cortisol is one of the major stress hormones. Adrenaline is the other one. Adrenaline is not as destructive and it's a lot easier to get rid of. But I'm going to show you it's either the next slide or the one after. I'm going to show you a hormone pathway chart to demonstrate exactly what's happening in your body when you're so stressed that your body is overproducing cortisol because it's in a fight or flight survival kind of state. So we have the direct cortisol production that, as I'm going to show you, when the body is overproducing cortisol, it's using up literally the nutrients and precursors that it would otherwise have available to make enough estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Like literally, if your adrenal glands that are supposed to be picking up the slack to be making these sex hormones for you, if they are needing to overproduce cortisol, they're going to be using all those nutrients and precursors to make the cortisol instead of those hormones. And that is the most significant factor in all of the issues that all of you have shared. That one thing. And as we saw a little earlier, not only is it like on a daily basis creating that difficulty, but the other thing is, usually menopause occurs around the age of 50. For most women at the age of 50, their adrenals are so fatigued, so overextended from, an adult lifetime of raising a family and putting ourselves last and trying to do life in the no pain, no gain way that works for men and not for women. That, a 50-year-old set of adrenals, when the body comes knocking at the door and says, "Gee, I'd like you to take on another job," I'm going to tell you to take a hike. This is why primarily that ideal menopause does not happen. And Liz asked if there's anything that we can do to, rejuvenate the adrenal glands. And the answer is, of course. But now you know that that's what you need to do. You probably had no idea about that before. This just blew me away when I learned about it, and it was, decades ago. It's still mind-blowing that almost nobody knows about this. I gave a talk about this down here in Delray 10, 12 years ago, and there was a doctor there, a medical doctor, a gynecologist who was a specialist in this area who came. I was really intimidated, actually. And at the end, she stood up and said to the rest of the group, "You have no idea how lucky you were to hear this today. I learned a lot." So this information to me is so basic at this point, and almost nobody knows about it. And when I shared it with Dr. Golda, who is this amazing woman that Jenny, recently met and introduced me to, who has been working in this field and doing the testing and developing the nutraceuticals and all of that, like taking all of this to the next level that I don't have. But when I shared this with her, she was like, "Oh, that's amazing. Yes, that's exactly the way we need to be educating women about this." So I think what we are going to have for you very soon is a complete package. And so, Liz, I'm very excited, and I don't even know yet exactly how deeply we're going to be able to support you because I haven't really gotten into Dr. Golda's work yet. But I know just from Dr. Collins' work and the line of herbal supplements that he developed and what I know about essential oils and other natural remedies, there is so much that we can do joyfully to support the adrenals. So it's a very loud yes. Plus, I've seen lots of us do that already. It's a very loud yes. So that is by far the biggest factor. A secondary factor, and we've referred to that a little bit already, is the toxicity in our world. There's so much around, chemicals in our personal care products that are endocrine disruptors. There's estrogen that's in the food supply that they use to fatten up the cattle. We could go on and on, but that is information. There's lots and lots of endocrine disruptors that we are being exposed to, and I think that is a major reason that women are going into perimenopause earlier and earlier. There's just a lot of estrogen that we're being exposed to that we shouldn't. And the other aspect of it, I mentioned the liver here. This is another like mind-blowing thing. And I have a slide here. We're going to talk a little bit more about estrogen because there's lots of different kinds of estrogen, and some of them are beneficial, and some of them are, there's some, you might have heard the term dirty estrogens with metabolites that the way hormones are metabolized in the body actually determines often how they affect us and whether estrogens are harmful or not is usually determined by our bodies in our liver and how toxic the liver is and whether it's able to metabolize the estrogen in a way that's healthy or not. That gets a little bit more complicated, a little beyond the scope tonight, but I know that that's a factor, is our overall toxicity. And, in the breast cancer conversation, it's a major one. One of our friends and colleagues is a wellness practitioner who specializes in this, and she's been part of our October PSAs about breast health. And she can show you exactly the heavy metals that contribute to certain dirty estrogens that contribute to breast cancer. These things are not so random. We know a lot more on the level of information than most of us have any idea about. And unfortunately, most doctors don't know about this stuff. So very few women are sufficiently educated yet about these things. And that's why, Jenny and Dr. Golda and I feel so passionate, like that there's an opportunity to change the global conversation. And if not us, who? So that's one of the things we're up to. And then the last thing here is about blood sugar, because I showed you on that other chart and I mentioned that we'd be mentioning insulin. It turns out that insulin and estrogen have a synergistic relationship. So it's very difficult for a woman to balance her hormones if her blood sugar is out of whack. And part of my work, in addition to Ayurvedic medicine, I work with the blood type science. For each blood type, there are a handful of foods that have proteins in them called lectins, and they're specific to each blood type. But the lectins for a person's blood type would actually mimic insulin and mess with estrogen. And I can tell you that way back in the early 2000s, when I completely balanced myself, it was when I gave up those foods. And I didn't do it for the purpose of balancing my hormones because I didn't have any idea what was going to happen. But I'm a rare blood type. I'm a B. I stopped eating chicken and a few other things. And I literally never had another cramp or day of bloat. And I had, for the rest of my menstrual life, a clockwork 28-day cycle. And I have seen that occur in friends and clients of mine that have followed this. There are certain foods for each blood type. Again, you wouldn't know that if you didn't know this, that mess with your blood sugar, that messes with your estrogen. And so on this path of balance, it's really, really helpful to know what those things are. And again, something I'm incredibly grateful to have discovered years ago. So again, this was a kind of important slide. So I'm going to stop again, see if anybody wants to ask or say anything. Because this is really powerful. Okay. I'll continue with my truth bombs then. So why is cortisol the problem? Because one of my quotes, Jenny's been collecting them. One of my quotes is cortisol is the problem and oxytocin is the solution. So why is cortisol the problem? Cortisol is the problem because of something called a pregnenolone steal that I was just describing a little while ago, that when the body's overproducing cortisol, it diverts all of the building blocks to make that. That's called the pregnenolone steal, and I'll show it to you on a chart in a minute. And that excess cortisol production, as we were saying, a minute ago, leads to both adrenal exhaustion and interferes with adrenal recruitment. It also, cortisol contributes directly to body fat, which women often start struggling with or continue struggling with at this time of life, sleep disturbances, which completely suck, and other imbalances. So again, if you're gonna focus on one thing, cortisol would be the one thing I would invite you to focus on. And there are, I'll just say many, many, many ways of helping to reduce cortisol. But one of the ones that I want to mention here, it goes back to the oxytocin thing. Oxytocin is the tend and befriend hormone. It's called the love hormone. It's something that's really, really important for women. And it's an antidote to cortisol. And it's something that women produce anytime that they are experiencing pleasure. So take that in if you would. That while, I was saying a little while ago, the, no pain, no gain way that men can function in the world really doesn't work for women. It burns us out. We are wired for pleasure. And some of the things that come under that heading, kind of obvious things like sex, but dancing and singing. And one of the biggies, which is why, we are one of the many reasons that we are so big about community in our community, is just women hanging out together increases our production of oxytocin. And I mentioned I have a few books here, and I can't wait. I'm going to show you this one. There aren't many medical doctors that I think really understand this whole process. One of the few that I have found that I feel really does. Her name is Dr. Sarah Gottfried. She's an MD, gynecologist, yoga teacher. And this is a book of hers called The Hormone Cure. That is a very good resource. She goes into much more science than I do about some of the things that we're discussing here. And I have heard her say on a video that if a man wants to feel better, he should hang out with a woman. And if a woman wants to feel better, she should hang out with her girlfriends. Because hanging out with our girlfriends contributes to oxytocin production, which reduces cortisol. So I am happy to tell you that one of the best things you can do is to come hang out with us, like for real, or any of your friends. This is information. This is science and a perspective and my opinion, but this is really validated. And Dr. Gottfried is a wonderful resource. She's the one, remember, Jenny, she was speaking at A4M and I really wanted to hear her and I didn't make it to her talk, but that's why I was so excited. I have a lot of respect for that lady. So I hope I've made my point about cortisol and pleasure. Dark chocolate is also good for reducing cortisol. And another very handy in the moment technique that many women who practice yoga or are familiar with it have been introduced to is something called alternate nostril breathing. Um, it is one of the most effective ways at reducing cortisol. And while I'm introducing some of my other mentors, there's another Dr. Claudia Welch is a doctor of Oriental medicine. So she has looked at all of this stuff from the perspective of Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, which is more my language. And of course, it all lines up in this, all of the things I'm sharing with you line up. And Dr. Welch has said in this book that her number one tool for helping women with hormone imbalances is alternate nostril breathing. That woman that does that 20 minutes a day won't have any hormone imbalances. That's a big commitment. And we have other tools. But I do want to share how powerful that is. And Jenny, did you want to add something to that? You're still muted, so rookie mistake.
No, I'm just, it just continues to blow me away how simple our body is able to
It's a
respond.
biohacking dream.
Yeah, I mean,
None of this is that hard.
and
Eat
it's just not
chocolate, have
talked about.
sex, hang out with your friends.
Yeah, breathe.
Breathe. Like exactly. Yeah. Okay, just in the interest of time, I'm going to keep going. Um, and I've been promising this chart, so I'm very happy to share this with you. And Christina, you've seen a version of this. This one is, I think, clearer than the one I had shared with you when we were looking at it in the past. But this is a kind of simplified chart that shows the cascade of hormone production. And I'm going to start at the bottom because the cortisol is here. And this is kind of where it demonstrates that if the body is overproducing cortisol, and remember we use the term the pregnenolone steal, it's going to steal literally the pregnenolone to make cortisol rather than the sex hormones. The other thing I want to draw your attention to, and we're not going to go off on this tangent tonight, but the top of this says cholesterol. Cholesterol is actually the critical precursor for all the hormones. And in the realm of definitely my opinion, but probably the other categories as well, we have been completely lied to about cholesterol. It is not the demon that we've been told it is. It's actually really, really important. And the reason that, men who are taking statin drugs often have erectile dysfunction is this, is without cholesterol, we can't make hormones. So if anybody is, doing any statin stuff, that is going to completely mess with hormones. That's a whole other dimension that I don't even usually talk about, but just mentioning that for the moment. So if you look at this, we can see that, at the top of the chain, we've got pregnenolone, and pregnenolone can go either to make progesterone on the left, or it can continue down to the hydroxypregnenolone and hydroxyprogesterone that makes the I can't even pronounce all of these things, but on the lower left, we end up with estrogen and testosterone, kind of at the end of the chain. And one of the principles that I have, this is an opinion and a perspective, is I mentioned earlier that the ratios among the hormones is really important. The ratios between estrogen and progesterone are almost as important as their actual levels. And because progesterone is a precursor, you can kind of see here, to both estrogen and testosterone, it's usually, I find, pretty safe. If a woman is having lots and lots of symptoms and we haven't gone through all the testing to be able to get it down to a science, it's a little hard to go wrong with a natural progesterone cream or a natural progesterone because the body is very intelligent and it knows how to maintain its ratios between estrogen and progesterone. So if you give the body progesterone and it doesn't need all of that to maintain the correct ratio with estrogen, it'll use some of it to make estrogen because it can convert it into that through this process. So you can't really overdo progesterone because the body will use it as a precursor to make the other things it needs, but it doesn't go the other way. Estrogen is something that can be tricky, and there's a few different types. And, Liz asked a good question earlier about the breast cancer connection. There potentially is one because estrogens can be helpful or harmful based on our toxicity and methylation and all kinds of other things. Again, it's a little bit above my pay grade. But just something for you to be aware of. I consider progesterone to be very safe. And sometimes when I meet a woman who is just really suffering, I sometimes suggest that as a Band-Aid because it's kind of hard to go wrong with that one. So moving on, I did want to say a little bit more about the estrogens. There are 3 different types. Again, we probably heard these, but don't really understand them. Estradiol is the estrogen that we basically produce during our childbearing years that are produced by the ovaries. Estrone, according to this, is the one that we make after menopause when our periods stop. So that would suggest that that's the form of estrogen that's made by the adrenal glands. And estriol is the one that is the weakest, and it's the main one during pregnancy. So again, this can get very complicated, but just to have some awareness of it, because when testing is done properly, we'd be wanting to see not just what our level of estrogen is, but which type. All right. Moving along, now I just need to tell you the story about Dr. Collins, and I'll try to be succinct. So in the early 2000s, I had developed the program that I developed with Ayurveda and the blood types. That is like my foundation wellness program that Jenny and Christina are very familiar with, and that we recommend to everybody as, like a basic, way to live. And it was before I was approaching menopause, and I had an intention that by the time I got to menopause, I would find the same level of wisdom about hormone balance that I had already discovered about general wellness. And sure enough, when you have a powerful intention, it manifests. And I was introduced to Dr. Collins' book, um, which I also have right here, called Discover Your Menopause Type. And short version, long story. Like I said, he was a nurse, became a naturopath, and he was working in labs that did hormone testing. And he identified that there was not just one pattern of menopause, wasn't just like low estrogen. What he recognized was that estrogen could be adequate or low, progesterone could be adequate or low, testosterone could be adequate, low, or excessive. Those combinations plus the first ideal one, he came up with 12. because there are different levels of imbalance. And I've seen this, in women over the years. There's not just one. They're all over the place. So how can you know what to balance if you don't know what's out of balance? Duh. He told me that when he realized this, he cried and said, I have harmed so many women without realizing it, with the training I had of just writing a prescription for hormones. So he developed this work. I got the book. I was so excited that I tracked him down and I found him and I called him on the phone and I introduced myself. I'm like so excited, and I, found you, and I have my thing, and I have my 12 types, and you've got your 12 types. And he was blown away, and I explained to him what I had done with Ayurveda and the blood types, and he actually said, Susan, your recommendations are way better than mine. I have nutrition and lifestyle recommendations in my book based on my 12 menopause types, but what you've done makes, but with your types makes it way more precise. And I promised him that I would get his work out in the world, and I still intend to do that. So that's how I came to this work of Dr. Collins. And I studied with him, and I was trained by him and certified by him. So when I mentioned that I'm a management of menopause type specialist, that's what I was referring to, is Dr. Collins' body of work. And like I said, unfortunately, he is gone, but he left a wonderful line of supplements. He's been an herbalist since the age of 9, and it was working with Chinese and Ayurvedic herbs, all of them anti-tumor, very, very safe. This is one of the directions that I have, guided, other women in over the years very successfully, because I, really, really, really believe in bioindividuality. And that's coming back, Liz. I said we were going to come full circle about how different everybody is. We're completely different. And one of my lines is one size fits all doesn't fit anybody. So where to start? Where I started was with Ayurveda and the constitutional types, and then the blood types, and then I added on the menopause types. So when I went through menopause, I wasn't just like some random woman having symptoms. I was a Pitta B6, and I knew exactly what to do. And again, within this framework of self-care and biohacking, I know exactly what to do. And I'm very excited at the prospect of collaborating with Dr. Golda, who can take it to the next level of the 24-hour testing to, identify exactly what's going on with everybody, exactly what nutrients they need for their adrenals. Again, it's very, very individual. And I'm just over the moon to have found her. And somebody that can kind of take what we're talking about here tonight to the next level. So how do we determine our hormone levels? This is what I learned from Dr. Collins. We start with a subjective look. I have very, very detailed questionnaires that I put together based on Dr. Collins' work and Dr. Gottfried's work and Dr. Welch's work. It's pretty clear when we fill them out, like kind of what the patterns are that are going on. It's also really important to get objective readings with tests. And the good news is blood tests are irrelevant. So if you don't like blood tests, don't worry. A single blood draw is not going to tell you what you need to know here. Dr. Collins never used them. Dr. Golda doesn't use them. We go for not blood, we go for saliva and urine tests, but not just a single draw. We want to see a 24-hour pattern, because without that, it's really hard to know exactly what's going on. And both of these are really important together. One without the other is not going to give you a really good picture, because you can't see the ratios without the tests. And without the subjective thing, you might be getting your tests back and getting that stupid, you're in the normal range, when you know that you're not optimal. And as he said, both of them are critical, especially because there's something called hormone resistance, like we've heard of insulin resistance. Your pancreas may be producing enough insulin, but for some reason your cells are not able to utilize it. That can happen with sex hormones as well. Might have enough of something, but it's not being utilized well enough. And that's a different challenge that just giving more hormones is not going to solve. Which again, I know that's happening all the time. So, do you see why I'm so passionate about this? This is so frustrating. So just as a little bit of a review with Ayurveda, there's 3 different constitutional types. They relate to air, fire, and water. There's small, medium, and large. Women with a lot of fire tend to have more hormone issues because Pitta rules the endocrine system. So based on your constitution, that can explain some things. With the blood types, there's 4 of those. Women with the A blood type have the most hormonal challenges because they produce the most cortisol. So again, with women in those archetypes, you know, kind of important to understand how we're navigating things. And then what I like, and again, this we're going to go into some of my opinion. But in this conversation, there's a distinction between restoral and replacement. What I have been speaking about mostly, and what Dr. Collins educated me in, is that when we go through this process, most women don't need hormone replacement. We're usually able to condition the adrenals and do whatever else we need to do to support the body in making the level of hormones that it needs for us to be healthy. And, there's one of my metaphors, Jenny's heard me say this many times. When we address our symptoms, they don't solve the underlying cause. When we address the underlying cause, that also deals with the symptoms. And I personally, and again, this is in the level of my opinion, knowing that Restoral is available to us, I consider that to be the better choice. Because even bioidentical hormones are still a band-aid on an imbalance. They don't actually balance us. If your body is not making enough estrogen, that is saying, gee, there's something that's not balanced here, that just giving you estrogen isn't going to balance. It's just going to address the symptoms. And as I mentioned earlier, there are other health things that go along with having the right levels of hormones. For example, estrogen and progesterone and testosterone all protect bone. So having deficiencies in all those hormones can increase a woman's risk for osteoporosis. Hormone imbalances can contribute to blood sugar things and heart disease and potential malignancies, not just hormone symptoms. So I think that going for Restoral and supporting the body and making its own hormones is by far the better option, knowing that now we have that available to us. And again, I experienced the magic of this. And it has to do with the nutrition and lifestyle tweaks that are, the right ones for you and your blood type and your type for, your foods and lectins and blood sugar balance and your stress profile and all of that. And then there are natural remedies available to us, like herbs and essential oils and homeopathics and stuff like that. Replacement, which provides supplemental hormones, there are 2 types. There's the bioidentical, which are chemically supposed to be the same as what the body produces and are much safer. And then there is synthetic hormone replacement therapy that Christina mentioned that she was on. And what I learned from Dr. Collins is that would never be the best choice. Synthetic hormones are not really good for the body. And that's an opinion and a perspective, and probably something for us to talk about, at another time. But I think this distinction between restoral and replacement is important. And again, most of us didn't know that restoral was available to us. So that's one of the things that I'm sharing here tonight about the truth, that restoral is available probably to most of us. And when I say that, it's possible that women who have had sex organs removed quickly and all of that, that transition can be really, really difficult. And there are times that I do agree that bioidentical identical support can be indicated in a targeted short-term way to give the body a jump start or to address a very specific issue. But my opinion is that they're not needed for most women. And the metaphor that I said I was going to offer is it's like you're sitting in a cold room and you put on a sweater and you have to wear that sweater for the rest of your life rather than turning on the heat. So that's the way I think of it. All right, we're in the home stretch. So my three-tier approach that I developed over the years, based on Dr. Collins' work, was the first one is the nutritional lifestyle upgrades and tweaks that we can all do based on the types that we are. And that's something I've been really enjoying sharing with women for years. And based on what we learned from that and the questionnaires that I have and the patterns that we can identify, based on your blood type and your constitution and all of that, there are natural remedies that we can, consider. Like I said, the herbs, the essential oils, how many things that are safe. And then, as I said, there are times, and I have an asterisk here, where I think targeted bioidentical hormones can be indicated. And I have an asterisk there because, again, I don't think most women ultimately need them. And I'm really, really, really excited about what Dr. Golda's program looks like to be able to offer something that makes sense, for those women for whom that's appropriate and that's what they want to opt for. And the bottom line, though, is that balance is an inside job and it is available to us. And if what I've shared tonight is making sense, and we can see like, oh, okay, my body was designed to know what to do and to function perfectly. And, the stress and toxicity and, of our world and choices that I've made that I didn't understand the impact of have messed with that. But now I know what the baseline is. I know what the potential is, and I can head back in that direction. And that is one way that I can help you do that is with consultation. I know tonight was a little bit of an infomercial. I know Christina's been excited about telling some of you about what I do. And she's like, well, how do I describe it? And I said, well, probably I would be the best one to describe it. So we decided to put this together tonight to share that with all of you. And that's what it looks like. It's a really, really very specific perspective on all of these things for you with very detailed questionnaires and a very personal perspective on what's going on with you, along with, my intuitive perspective and my experience with all of this. So that's what I wanted to share with you all tonight. The end for now, to be continued.
Thank you for that presentation. Appreciate it.
You are very
Wonderful.
Very
welcome.
informative.
I'm
Wonderful.
going to stop the recording because I try not to let those go too long in case anybody wants to listen to them. And if there's any questions here, we could just have those among ourselves. So I'm gonna stop the recording. I've made that mistake a couple of times recently that I I ended the meeting instead of stop the recording. Where is it? Here it is. Recording